You're tuned in to Women in America, the podcast that dives deep into the issues shaping gender equality in the U.S. and beyond. Hosted by Pari and Eve, public health professionals by day, content creators by passion, we bring you expert insights, compelling stories, and actionable strategies to push the fight for equality forward. Abortion access isn't just a contentious issue in the United States, it's a global matter, with countries around the world grappling with their own reproductive rights challenges. In this episode, we examine how abortion laws vary internationally, what the U.S. can learn from nations with progressive policies, and how global movements for reproductive justice are shaping the fight for gender equality worldwide. A quick note on this episode was pre-recorded in December of 2024, and since then, significant policy changes have occurred. On January 24th, 2025, Trump reinstated the Global Gag Rule, which we reference in this episode. Further, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, led by Elon Musk, has initiated substantial cuts to USAID, effectively dismantling the agency and significantly impacting global health programs that were already at risk due to the reinstated Global Gag Rule.
We've been hearing a lot of people talk about what's coming on and after January 20th, but I know.
I'm like, do we have to do this episode? I don't want to.
Honestly, fair, but like you always say, preparation is power.
I do say
So
that.
let's do it.
All right, prep us.
One thing that I feel like nobody is actually discussing, but like historically, since the 1970s, every Republican president that has come into power has instated what's called the Global Gag Rule, which is this like really horrible way for basically America to be like, we are the global superpower and are going to tell everybody else how to live their damn lives. And we export American policy to every other country in the world, even though they didn't have the chance to vote for us.
Right, but they don't call it the Global Gag Rule. That is our fun nickname for it. They call it the Mexico City policy because it sounds less horrendous than what it actually is.
Because people picture Mexico City and they're like, damn, that place is gorgeous. This must be great. And it turns out, no, it's just a false name. But the Global Gag Rule, which is what it really is as the name suggests, a gag on all global public health funding.
And not the fun type of gag, like not a ball gag.
Yeah, you telling me.
The bad kind of gag.
Basically, Republican administrations, I don't know why I just said administrations. I think I meant to say admin, and then I just said the whole word. Might be.
This is the only way to talk about this is through like horrid laughter.
Yeah. Okay, right, so every time there's been a Republican president, they have instituted this rule that basically says that if you are a foreign government or foreign entity that is accepting any form of international development funds from the US, you are no longer allowed to provide or refer anyone in your organization to abortion services. And you might be like, well, that's not that big a deal, but let us play this scenario out for you, okay? So, like, suppose you are an NGO in Nigeria and you're trying to run a malaria prevention program, and you decide to accept dollars from USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, to run that malaria program. That would be pretty normal, right? The US is the global superpower, and therefore we have the largest amount of aid dollars in the world. The problem is that the minute that you decide to accept those US government funds, you are now no longer allowed to accept money, whether it's from the US government or any other source, to perform any form of reproductive health services. So let's say your malaria clinic is also providing like contraceptive access, or cervical cancer screenings, or just like providing antenatal care to pregnant women in the community. You now have to shut down all of those arms of your programming because you have chosen to accept US dollars. And that's bullshit.
Yeah. Because it's expanded over time, right? So US government dollars cannot go to abortion ever because of the Hyde Amendment
Yeah.
directly to abortion.
Tell the people what the Hyde Amendment is.
Yeah, so the Hyde Amendment was an amendment from the 1980s that prevents any federal dollars from going towards abortion services, which is different from the referrals and counseling that you just mentioned. So, regardless of the administration, the Hyde Amendment is in place all the time. And at no time can money from the federal government go towards abortion services, except if the mother's health is at risk. Then we have the Helms Amendment, which is a U.S. policy that prevents the use of foreign aid to pay for abortion, and that was passed in the early 1970s in response to the Roe v. Wade decision. So, to summarize so far, federal dollars cannot be spent on abortion within the U.S. because of the Hyde Amendment. Federal dollars can also not be spent on abortion in foreign aid because of the Helms Amendment. So that is regardless of administration. The global gag rule that you're talking about takes it a step further that says, in addition to not be money being able to go to the services themselves, it also cannot go to counseling or referrals.
Yeah. And the problem with that is that because based on the president, if we went Republican, Democrat, because there's a continuous fluctuation in the policy and the Republicans are never clear about what is actually impacted, these countries are not able to recover because like they temporarily have to shut down their services. Your whole infrastructure, you can't get it back up and running. You can't train people. You can't do all of that in time for the next administration. So basically, there's just a rupture of services constantly in these places. And when Trump came in the first time, he expanded the global gag rule to be larger than it had ever been before. So initially, it was just for family planning services. He expanded it to all health services.
So it used to be if you were getting money to provide family planning services.
Yeah.
That's how it was since the 70s.
Yeah.
And then in 2019, Trump expanded it to more than just taking money for family planning.
It was all public health.
So if you are a foreign entity and you take money for any public health services,
Yeah, like
then
malaria.
you also cannot provide abortion counseling or referral for
Yes,
abortions.
but not just abortion. That was the problem. Because he expanded it to include all public health and didn't provide any guidance around what that meant, people interpreted it to be safe to mean anything related to sexual and reproductive health.
Yeah, which is a chilling
So,
effect. They're like,
yeah,
I'm not sure. I don't know what the rules are. The US government is like the largest development funder in the world, so it's hard to turn down that money. A lot of organizations can't afford to. And
yeah,
so they're just like, screw it. I don't want to take the chance of being like out of compliance with this global gag rule. So I'm not going to do any abortion related, any like sexual and reproductive health. I don't want anything to do with it because
yeah.
I
There
want to
was no
safeguard it for the purposes that I need it for.
contraceptive access declined drastically. People didn't have access to family planning. There was no breast cancer screening anymore, no cervical cancer screening anymore. And actually, in some countries, the confusion extended so far that people were kicking out family planning clinics from the same buildings as other NGOs because they were like, if we share an address, the US government will think that we are affiliated in some capacity. So I don't like, I mean, the impact of this American policy on the world is huge. And none of these people in these countries are able to even vote for who the American president is. So it's like
Yeah.
their healthcare, their services, their access is being impacted by someone that they have absolutely no say about. And I could totally see like the conservative crowd being like, good, we shouldn't be supporting that. But like the whole point of having a global capitalist economy is that this is how development dollars work, right? And so,
It undermines other countries' national sovereignty
oh,
when
100%.
it comes,
And it's
especially when it comes to their health systems.
Yeah, and it's shameful that this is what we do, but I don't think a lot of people know about or realize that this is something that happens every time there's a Republican president.
Or how much it's being expanded, right?
Yeah, I'm curious if they're going to expand it even further this time, given what he did last time.
So he's
So,
planning to expand it even further. And two things we didn't talk about that also happened last time is that we're not talking about like you just simply can't use the US government money on abortion or referral services. If you take US government money, you also can't use money that comes from other places. So you could be getting money from the Swedish government, the German government, other foundations, US foundations or otherwise, and you can't use their money to cover those types of services.
Yeah, exactly.
And he also expanded it to not just be like your organization can't do it, but you can't subcontract it out either.
Yeah. And that's an important distinction because in 2016, when he did this for the first time, there were, I think, six other governments that stepped up as a way of attempting to bridge the gap in funding for reproductive health.
Hmm.
I believe it was the Canadians, the Swedes, the Norwegians, and perhaps the Australians, and then a few others that I'm currently are slipping my mind. But they stepped up and pledged, I think it was $600 million to try and
Hmm.
cover that gap.
Hmm.
And it was just so sad because these organizations could not even avail of that money
Hmm.
because if they did, then they would be shutting down their other programs.
Hmm.
And I know 600 million sounds like a lot, but when you compare that to what USAID is bringing into the development space, it is still a pretty small drop. And so, even though these other governments were actually, for once, doing the right thing
Hmm.
and acting as, like good players in the space, their efforts were almost futile because they couldn't use those dollars because it would still put at risk everything else they were doing.
So it's interesting that you brought up that exact amount because when Trump expanded it during his last presidency from family planning to public health, it was $600 million. So that was the amount that needed to be covered. When he further expanded it to all development,
Mm. They
it now
couldn't
has a
cover that.
value of $12 billion dollars.
See, that's crazy. Like that, and that's what I mean, right? Is that unfortunately the other countries they don't have the kind of economies to be able to be playing that same game. But I
So,
remember in 2016, what happened was I believe it was the Canadian government that started it, and they developed that coalition. So the goal was for the coalition to be able to meet the moment, which is why they met the same amount of dollars. But they obviously, like you said, they can't compete when we're talking about development dollars in the multi-billions.
conservatives at large, and particularly Trump right now, are making it so that organizations can't take US government funds and provide the services they want to provide. They also can't use other countries' money, other organizations' money to provide the services that they need to provide. And they're expanding it to such great lengths that other country governments can no longer come in and subsidize what these organizations are turning down in order to be able to provide the services that they want to provide. The US's gag on abortion services is frankly a worldwide gag.
True.
It's a world
And
gag.
if I was to say that even more explicitly, Trump is going to be responsible for the deaths of women
Mhm.
globally. And he will, of course, never admit that or take responsibility, but that's the exact truth of the scenario.
And it's hard to calculate that number because when abortion isn't available, we know that women don't stop having them. They just have them in an unsafe way. And it's really hard for governments to track the unsafe abortions because
Because
those
it's
are,
underground.
it's under, yeah, they're not legal. So there's no like surveillance data that's capturing these deaths. And so it works in the favor of conservatives because there's no data, there's no clear data.
Yeah. And they're getting rid of all the domestic
And
data.
they're getting rid of the domestic data
Yeah.
anyway because they know if you don't have, not that people believe the data anyway
No.
anymore, but it's like the small thing that we can fall back on that's becoming more and more impossible.
Yeah. Like Texas, Idaho, Georgia, in the last 2 months have all disbanded their maternal mortality registries.
That is wild.
Very intentionally, right? So we're talking today about like reproductive rights around the world. And I want to really emphasize how much the US plays a role globally. Like we have since 2016, actually since probably 2014, because that's when the campaign began, there has been like a rise in conservatism globally. We've
Mm-hmm.
seen that in how elections are going. We've seen that in changes in abortion policy.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think about it in terms of like when you and I try and travel on vacation, we're always like, let's try and go somewhere where our dollars are supporting a pro-choice environment. And I've been reflecting on how like the options are getting scarcer and scarcer.
They are. I don't know if you remember this, but I posted on this when I was traveling around
Yeah, yeah.
Colombia just for funsies because Colombia had decriminalized abortion just in the last like couple of years. And people thought we were joking. They were
Yeah.
like, there's no way you only do that kind of travel. There's no way you check. No, we do. Because money and investing in other countries is your biggest form of protest.
Yeah. I mean, you're a consumer
So I'm
ultimately.
not spending my dollars in places that don't treat women well,
Yeah.
which
But like
is pretty much a lot of the world now. But we find the
the
small
small
places
wins,
that aren't,
the small
like
wins.
France,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, which, as a reminder to folks, France enshrined abortion rights into their constitution
Yep.
earlier this year, which is
They
a,
did
or
did
was
the
it
damn thing.
late last year? Either way, they did it, yes. Well, first of all, it's a big deal because they're one of the first countries to do that, but also because they were on the verge of an election and everyone was anticipating that the far right candidates were going to win.
Hmm.
And while they do still seem to be experiencing a wave of conservatism as well, the election ended up going the other way.
Hmm.
And there were a few articles that said that it was a result of the mobilization that happened around the enshrining of abortion. I like remember where I was that day, which maybe for the average person it's not like a where were you when moment,
I
but
mean,
I remember
if
I
you
was
work in
at
our field,
yeah, I was at the doctor's office.
oh,
I
perfect.
got a notification on my phone and I looked at it and I was like, oh, cool. And then I put my phone away and then I was like, wait, let me go
This
back
is a huge
to look at
deal.
it again. Yeah. And I remember like just celebrating and my partner and I were just playing French music the rest of that day.
Wait, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Is that why you had your wedding in France?
Okay, well, I would love to say yes, but that was probably what got us like, hey, maybe we should consider
Hmm.
this place.
I mean,
There
you
were,
took it to the next level where you're
yeah,
like, not
there were
only is it
obviously,
going to decide where we travel, but if we have to have our wedding, like I want to have a destination wedding, I'm
yeah,
going to do it in a place that respects women. Let's fucking go.
yeah. You know, it's funny you asked me that question because I'm not sure if I ever explicitly put that together in my mind, but yeah, quite possibly that's maybe one of the first things that got us thinking about that.
It occurred to me once or twice while we were there, but I forgot to ask you until now. So I'm glad that we've
Well,
closed that
well, now
door.
I feel good about it. I'm like, oh
Good.
yeah, okay, that was like an excellent decision.
I mean, I figured part of it had to do with the massive amounts of cheese that were available because,
The
your partner
pastries, I
and
mean,
we all love the
truly,
cheese, but I'm
yeah.
glad it was also for that reason.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the wedding because I remember being there and just feeling so freaking relaxed.
Hmm.
It was actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it was the first time that you and I took a break since we had started Gemma.
That is
It was for my
crazy.
wedding. And we
Was
had
that
both,
after a year?
yeah, it was a little over a year. And you and I had both like committed to ourselves that we were not gonna work during that time because it was like our time. And
Which was
I,
very hard for us since we were also together. But of course,
yeah,
you were like very busy hosting like tens and tens of family members. And
yeah, but the hilarious part is that somehow the logistics of coordinating a wedding in a foreign country were much more relaxing to me than you and I needing to constantly be on top of US news relating to reproductive health. Like
yeah.
I remember being in a totally different state of mind. Like I was chill. I was like, this is so lovely. Everything is amazing. And I remember how hard it was getting back into the swing of things when we got back because I was
Yeah.
just like, I was like, wait, I haven't had to think about my rights as a human being for the last 2 weeks, and it's been great. And
I
instead, I've
mean,
just been stuffing my face with pastries.
we do often joke about, our 9 to 5s and this media work we do as an exercise in masochism. We
Yeah.
do it because we believe in it. But I will agree that whenever I travel and don't have like the day-to-day responsibilities and, the weight of the advocacy work that we do on my shoulders, I do kind of feel like a different person. You remember after your wedding, before we met back up for your communal honeymoon, which you'll have to tell people about, I took a few days by myself and I just went down to like a farm in
Yeah.
southern France, like in the Pyrenees Mountains, and did this French immersion camp. And it was so fun. And it ended up just being me and the tutor because it was kind of like the off season. And I just hung out on a French farm and drank whole milk and ate bonbons and ate all the cheese. And it was the most relaxing time that I had had in a long time.
Yeah. And I love that for you. And I hope that you get that soon
I know.
again.
I'm like, when is the next vacation?
But that's the point I'm trying to make is that like I don't feel that way when I just take a break while still being here.
No.
I think it's because like you can't really disconnect from like the constant barrage of news. I think people like who don't necessarily work in the reproductive health space don't realize how much shit changes every day. Like it's
Hmm.
sometimes I feel like if I am like, doing something else for a few hours, I could actually miss like major news happening, which shouldn't
Hmm.
be the case. Make politics boring again. Like seriously, No, for real. And so it was like really nice actually being there even though I was coordinating a whole bunch of shit, it was
Hmm.
like so much easier. And I just remember having a moment after we got back being like, "Oh my God, is that
Damn it.
really the kind of like mental and emotional burden we take on every day without realizing?"
I love when men come into our comments and they're like, "Well, if you don't like it here, go somewhere else." I'm like, "I would gladly. Will you pay for my plane ticket?"
Right.
And that's not to say I don't love the US. I do for a lot of reasons, and I don't for a lot of reasons. But the people who set it up as if it's a threat to tell you to leave America,
I know, it's so
like
dumb.
we have it all figured out and we're the only ones who know what we're doing when like literally the polar opposite couldn't be more true.
Also, I always find that approach being like, we'll go somewhere else so dumb because I'm like, me critiquing the US is me showing love to this country. Like,
Yes.
like the whole point is like, I want this to be the best possible place. I want it
Hmm.
to live up to the potential that I know that it has. And like,
Hmm.
why are you okay with it not being that? Like, you're
Hmm.
actually the one who doesn't give a damn about this country or the
Hmm.
people in it. And I know that not everybody like realizes that that's the approach, but like that is I'm not comparing myself to them, but I'm just saying like the greatest leaders anywhere in the world are the people who are actively attempting to improve a scenario because they
Hmm.
know that it can be better, as
Hmm.
opposed to just like sitting on their stupid throne being like, this is the best it can be. So, what are you doing?
Yeah. So I want to get to your communal honeymoon, but I don't think we're done with France yet. Because your
Oh,
honeymoon was out, it was partially in France, but then you went to Italy and we ended up in Turkey. But I feel like there's been so much going on with France that also backed like why you had your wedding there.
oh, well, I mean, okay, so obviously we can't really talk about France without talking about the Pellicot case, right? It's like,
Hmm.
I mean, it's not abortion, but it is 100% reproductive rights, human
Hmm.
rights, everything. And the Pellicot case is the story of this superwoman, Giselle Pellicot.
Trigger warning.
Yeah, I should have said that in the beginning. Who, over the course of 20 years, was drugged by her husband and then raped by him and multiple men in her village. I call her Superwoman because she chose to forego anonymity during
Hmm.
this trial, right? So she's taking her husband and these 83, no, sorry, she was violated by 83 other men, but they've only identified 50 of those men. So she's taken her husband and these other 15 men to trial, and France's laws allow her the option of anonymity, and she waived it because she wanted the names of her perpetrators to be public record.
Mm-hmm.
And so her face, her information, her story, the videos of her being assaulted are plastered all over the internet. And this woman is a fucking hero because
Mm-hmm.
she put herself through the ringer to bring these men to justice.
Mm-hmm.
And I say justice, but with a huge asterisk, because frankly, like the verdict of her case came in after months and months of a trial, and all but one of the men that was involved received some sort of sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is, the reason I call it justice with an asterisk is because by French standards, the sentences are egregiously low. Some of the sentences are only for 3 years. Her husband got the maximum for aggravated rape, which is 20 years. Why it's not life is like beyond
That's
me.
crazy.
But yeah, so some of the other men got that, right? You think about that, and then you think about how we've been conditioned in the US for survivors of violence to never or so rarely experience justice. Like I'm thinking about the Brock Turner case where there
Mm.
was DNA evidence, physical evidence, a
Mm-hmm.
witness, and the guy still only got 6 months, of which he
Mm-hmm.
ultimately only served 3 months. Like I will never forgive the
Mm-hmm.
US judicial system, our patriarchy, anything, right? But because we are so accustomed to bullshit like that, to me, like when I saw the Palikot verdict, I was like, hell yeah. And then I actually started reading the French media's response, and they were all like, "This is bullshit." And I was like, "Yes, it totally is. Actually, you're completely right. It's just this is how much I've been sensitized."
Yeah.
But we bring that up just to say, like, I hope that this case propels a huge change, right,
Mm-hmm.
across not just the way that legal systems are run, but the way that sexual assault cases are handled. And I
They're
mean,
talking about it creating a second wave of the Me Too movement, which is great, but is so like to your point of what you were just saying, the Me Too movement happened originally here in the US, right?
Mhm.
And then there was this huge backlash from men who were like, oh, now I can't do anything because so many people were accused and convicted of assault and harassment and all this stuff. Now I can't do anything. Yes, you can.
Yeah, but like, what
Because
were
that
you
Brock
doing?
Turner, yeah, also like if you're being a normal human, you shouldn't have to worry about that stuff.
Exactly.
But it's still a problem here. Like
Yeah,
men still are not getting arrested at the rate that they should when they commit assault. They're not getting the sentences that they should, like you're talking about the Brock Turner case. They're still fairly free to do whatever the fuck they want.
right. It's crazy to me because like the reaction online from men in the US has still been like, well, not all men. Yeah, but like 83 men within her small village of 5,000 were still willing to show up and rape an unconscious woman. Like,
Can we
it's
stop and think about what that takes? Let's remove rape. Let's just say, like, somebody invited you over and their partner was unconscious in the house.
yeah.
Would you even hang out there?
I mean, the normal person would be like, hell no, right? Or call the cops. And the saddest part is that there were men who showed up, changed their minds when they saw the situation, and then chose not to report it. So they
Yeah,
knew it
that's
was happening.
crazy. Hmm.
Actually, that's not the saddest part. I shouldn't have said that. There's so many sad parts. There's also parts where like the court has found over the course of the trial that some of the men involved in doing this are actually doing the same thing to their own partners. But
God.
because like that's outside of the confines of this case, that doesn't come in as evidence or
Yeah.
whatever. But yeah, the things that women get subjected to are truly insane. But I want to say this case is so just like beautiful because of Giselle's power, right?
Hmm.
She really flipped the script of shame on its head.
Hmm.
Shame belongs with the perpetrators. We've always known that, but that's never how the legal systems have operated. And
Hmm.
she owned this shit in a way that it's just so impressive. And I have, frankly, I'm not gonna lie, been thinking about how if this case happened in the US, how the US media would have responded to her versus how the French media has responded.
Hmm.
We love to talk in the US about how we are the greatest country on this earth and the freest country on this earth. And it's like, no, obviously, like countries like France and otherwise are showing us that there are way better ways to do things. And we need to be adopting some of that.
And then there's another case out of El Salvador.
Yeah, exactly. El Salvador, which The context of El Salvador is that abortion has been illegal there since 1997.
And when you say illegal, you mean like no exception for there's nothing, no way to
Exactly.
get it. Yeah.
Banned outright.
Okay.
Which can, only make me think about how many women have suffered. But Beatrice, we don't know her last name because it wasn't part of the case, but
Yeah.
in 2011 was 22 years old. She had an infant child and she had a series of health issues. And then she found out she was pregnant again. But in this time, her fetus had an encephaly, which is the condition where you have water on the brain.
Mhm.
And her doctors told her without a doubt that it was not going to survive. And then in the same sentence, they told her she needs an abortion. Except they live in El Salvador, so that procedure literally does not exist.
Right. So
Like,
then what is she supposed to do?
well, that's just it. Imagine this. Like your doctors are telling you, "Hey, you have a non-viable pregnancy. You're about to suffer. Your fetus is going to die, but there's nothing we can do."
Sorry.
Yeah, basically. So Beatrice took her case to the Supreme Court, and
To the El Salvador Supreme
yeah,
Court. Okay.
the El Salvadorian Supreme Court said no. So then Beatrice was like, what the hell am I supposed to do? So she took her case international. Now, there is a court called the Inter-American Court for Human Rights. Okay. And it is part of this group called the Organization of American States, of which El
Mhm.
Salvador is a member. So she took her case there.
Wait,
The,
can we just stop for a second and appreciate how much of a badass
I
Beatrice
know, right?
is? That you were like, all right, my local courts don't work for me. My country's court doesn't work for me. I'm going global, bitches. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna find a court that will work for me.
And she's 22.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's wild.
And she has lupus, arthritis, and is experiencing renal failure while also pregnant with a non-viable pregnancy. Like,
And has children.
yeah,
Hmm.
mad props.
Hmm.
But yeah, so she takes it to the Inter-American Court for Human Rights.
Hmm.
That court rules that the country of El Salvador has to give her an abortion.
Nice.
El Salvador still refuses.
Great.
Okay, so they literally put their membership in this organization at stake because they refused to do it. And then Beatrice got super gravely ill 81 days into her pregnancy. So, like, just shy of 3 months. And it was only at that point that the country allowed her, and I say allowed her,
Hmm.
to receive an emergency C section. So, it wasn't even an abortion.
Hmm.
She had to have an emergency C section.
So
And
we are going to cut you open
yeah,
and your uterus and do this invasive surgery to remove the pregnancy when we could have just done an abortion, which is
yeah,
way less invasive.
yeah. And the fetus
Cool,
died
cool, cool, cool,
immediately
cool, cool,
after.
cool. Okay.
So putting her through trauma, putting the fetus through trauma, like it was all super unnecessary, right?
Hmm.
And then in the years following, her health deteriorated significantly.
Hmm.
And then unfortunately in 2017, she had an unrelated car accident and she succumbed to
Hmm.
her injuries. But by that point, she had become this like symbol of how El Salvador's anti-abortion law was endangering women, like truly like putting their lives at risk, putting their entire well-being at risk. And so the same court from before took her case up as like a human rights case against El Salvador. So
Okay,
that
so she had the C-section, so
Mhm.
ended the pregnancy because the fetus died as soon as it was removed.
Yeah,
She kept getting sicker from her pre-existing health conditions that had nothing to do with the pregnancy that she had just ended. And then unfortunately, she got in a car crash and died, which is like a very sad ending to her case. But then posthumously,
yes.
this case picked her situation back up to try it on like a human rights
Yeah,
stage.
exactly. Although the only thing I'll say is they're not sure about whether her health deteriorating was affected by the pregnancy or not. So it might have
Okay.
been the fact
Mhm.
that she didn't receive immediate care and had all of that happen. Because she got the reason
Mhm.
why she was even eligible for that C-section is because she was super ill
Yeah.
while pregnant.
Yep.
Yeah. So basically, the Inter-American Court for Human Rights took her case up. So it's them versus El Salvador. And in 2024, so 11 years after her initial case,
And she's
they,
gone from this
yeah,
earth.
she's gone. The case concluded with the court ruling that El Salvador was guilty of violating her human rights by not providing her an abortion. And that's super important because, one, they're elevating, just as the Geneva Convention of Human Rights does, abortion as a human right. And then they also obligated the country to pay reparations to her family.
Oh, wow.
And the reason why this is a huge deal is because Latin America has like 6 countries with outright abortion bans, right? And all of those 6 countries, including El Salvador, are a member of the Organization of American States, where this court resides. So the court saying that El Salvador's law is a direct violation of human rights is an indication that these other 5 and El Salvador, Latin American states, are now in a position where they have to either change their law or be subject to constant cases where they are having to pay out people because they have violated their human rights by denying them abortions. Like, it sets a legal precedent for this concept of obstetric violence that has never existed before in Latin America. And
it does set this legal precedent, though, against the backdrop of a lot of Latin American countries liberalizing their abortion policies. So there's this like crazy range in Latin America, right? There's places like El Salvador and the Dominican Republic where abortion is essentially completely banned. But then there's places like Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, where it's fully decriminalized. And these countries are like trying to hash out what the tolerance is across their populations for women getting the care that they need in this sense, but it's a big range.
For sure. And pro-choice advocates in the region have been fighting these multitude of different kinds of battles, right? Based on like where they're focused. But the reason why this case could become pretty critical is because it could push those 6 states that are on one extreme side further along in like the spectrum of legality.
6 countries.
Yeah, basically it's just like these are just 2 examples of women who unfortunately had to go through hell in order to receive like big changes. But as a direct result of their stories and their courage and their experiences, change is now coming for multiple people following them.
So I'm really excited to see, the progress that's going to be made in Latin America over the next 5, 10, 15 years, because that's where the green wave started, the green movement, which is, really coordinated network of women and allies and accomplices fighting for abortion rights in Latin America across the region. It's also where you and I started the Gemma Talks account and our consulting work together, and like evolved our friendship into this larger advocacy platform. We were like bopping around Latin America, so it has like a special place in my heart. And I think that we're going to have a lot to celebrate there in the next few years.
Here's hoping.
Here's to hoping. The fight for reproductive rights isn't just happening in the US. It's a worldwide movement, and history shows that progress is possible when people refuse to back down. By learning from other countries, we can push for bold, evidence-based policies that protect reproductive freedom. Next time on Women in America, we're looking ahead. What's next for abortion rights in the United States? How can we keep fighting back against restrictions and push for real change? We're breaking down the path forward, and you don't want to miss it.